the New Deal and try to grab all the same policies of the 1930s and think somehow they'd work in the 21st century. So Blanche is exactly right that sometimes we get ideologically bogged down. I just want to find out what works. And I know you do too. And I know the people in Arkansas do too. But when you're talking to the folks in Arkansas, you also have to remind them what works is not just going back and doing the same things that we were doing before. And yes, there's going to be some transition time. If we have a serious financial regulatory reform package, will the banks squawk? Yes. Will they say this is the reason we're not lending? Yes. The problem is we know right now they're not lending and paying out big bonuses. And we know that the existing regulatory system doesn't work. So we shouldn't be spooked by this notion that, well, is now the time to take seriously, in an intelligent way, not in a knee-jerk way, the challenge of financial regulatory reform so that you don't have banks that are too big to fail and you're not putting taxpayers at risk and you're not putting the economy at risk. Now's the time to do it. The same is true with health care. The same is true with health care. There are, I promise you, at least as many small businesses out there, if you talk to them, who will say, I just got my bill for my health insurance and it went up 40%. And we've got to do something for them. All right?
Nick.
All right.
Next question, the junior senator from state of New York, Kirsten Gillibrand.
President, I have an issue I'd like
Here, Kristen, we've got a mic for you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have an issue I'd like to raise that is very important to every New Yorker and to many, many Americans. And that's health care for our 9/11 responders and for all the communities that live near Ground Zero. Now, these Americans hail from every one of the 50 states and every single congressional district in the entire United States.
Right.
And now, because of exposure to toxins from the collapse of the World Trade Center towers, there's about 20,000 people who are sick, some of them gravely ill, suffering from serious health effects. Some are disabled, some have died. I've introduced legislation to provide permanent care and proper compensation for these Americans. And my question is, would you today commit to working with Congress to pass a comprehensive 9/11 health bill that's fully paid for?
Well, I fully commit to working with you guys. Keep in mind that our budget already significantly increased funding precisely for this purpose. So I'm not just talking the talk. You know, we've been budgeting this as a top priority for the administration. I confess, Kristen, I have not looked at all the details of your legislation, but I know that not only you and Chuck, but everybody here wants to make sure that those who showed such extraordinary courage and heroism during 9/11, that they are fittingly cared for, and that's going to be something that we are going to be very interested in working with you on. All right?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Good.
The next question is the chairperson of the Environment and Public Works Committee, Senator Barbara Boxer.
Hey, Barbara Boxer.
Great to see you here, Mr. President, and thanks for doing this, and thanks for meeting with the Republican caucus at the House. I thought it was very instructive for the American people. As Senator Feinstein and I tell our colleagues every day, California's hurting. I know that you're aware of that. And they really want to see a fighting spirit in us, that we are committed, even though we've had some political setbacks, to get the job done. And I just want to tell you, as I watched you during the State of the Union, listen to you, what you are doing now is really important to the folks that I represent, because you're showing that fighting spirit no matter what the adversity is, and you're coming up with specific proposals. So I want to ask you about small business. We all know they're the job creators. 64% of new jobs over the last 15 years came from small business. your new proposal, which does mirror a couple of people, I look at Senator Merkley, I know Senator Warner and others, we've worked hard on this, for community banks to lend. Can you do that by executive order? Because my understanding is you can use some of the TARP funds that were paid back and use that, or those funds that have not been used. Can you use that and get this going by executive order, or do you need us to put that program into a jobs bill? And second, are you using your influence as much as you can to get the big banks to lend? They've dropped lending by $12 billion over the last year. So I wonder if you can give us an update on that.
First of all, I've now taken trips to Allentown, Pennsylvania, Elyria, Ohio. Most recently, I was in Baltimore. Had a great time in Baltimore. Just recently, Nashua, New Hampshire. Haven't been to Searchlight yet, but we're going to get there. And everywhere I go, you talk to small business, and they will tell you they are still experiencing a severe credit crunch. The larger businesses right now are able to get financing. Even the medium-sized businesses, the credit markets have improved. Smaller businesses, even if they are making a profit and have not missed a payment, are finding that banks are adverse to providing them capital. Now, two reasons that they cite. One is they say their bankers are telling them that the regulators are just looking over their shoulder too much, and so the community banks feel that their hands are tied. These are independent regulators. They are diligent in doing their jobs. Obviously, they feel caught off guard because of the lax regulation in some cases of the banking industry before the financial crisis. You get a sense that the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction. The challenge that we've got is we've got to be careful because these are independent regulators and we don't want to politicize that. But what Treasury Secretary Geithner and others have done is to discuss with the regulators what we are hearing in the field and to make sure that there is a consistency of approach that doesn't prevent banks from making what are good loans and taking reasonable risks. So that's one thing we're hearing. The other thing, though, that is still out there is that the larger banks generally haven't been in this market. A lot of the smaller companies never had access to them in the first place, and we want to actually see if we can get more of those large banks to get into this marketplace. And when I met with the big bank CEOs, this was something that I pushed them on. They tell me, and we have seen some confirmation of this, that they are actually ramping up some of their small business lending and setting up more aggressive divisions, actively seeking out loans. So that's the effort that we're making to jawbone the private sector to do what it needs to do. In the meantime, you mentioned the specific proposals that we put forward. I do think it's better to do them through legislation than through executive order. TARP was a congressionally created structure with some fairly stringent guidelines in terms of how we were supposed to approach it. It shouldn't be hard to do, though. It's a pretty simple concept. Banks have repaid money. There's $30 billion that we could take that has already been repaid, immediately apply that to a fund so that small banks or community banks are able to provide their small business customers with greater lending. And I do think that getting that as part of a jobs package is priority number one. And I know I've already talked to Harry about this. My assumption is that if you combine that with the tax credits that we put in place for hiring, the provisions that we've talked about to incentivize weatherization programs so that can immediately start hiring people to retrofit